$111 trillion. That is how much debt the world's governments are carrying right now. Not millions, not billions. $111 trillion. A number so large that most people simply cannot process it. And here's the part that does not make the news. That number is growing fast. Governments around the world are borrowing more money every single year than they borrowed the year before. And most of the people whose lives depend on these decisions have no idea it is happening. Today, Coin Explained breaks it all down. What national debt actually is, how every country ended up here, what happens when it gets out of control, and what it means for your money right now. What is national debt and how does it work? Let's start with the basics, because most people have a vague sense that national debt is bad, but very few understand what it actually is. When a government spends more money than it collects in taxes, it runs a deficit. To cover that gap, the government borrows money. It does this by issuing bonds, essentially IOUs. It says to investors, banks, and other governments, lend us money today, and we will pay you back later with interest. National debt is simply the total amount a government owes from all of these borrowings accumulated over time. Now here is something important that surprises most people. Debt is not automatically bad. In the same way a family might take out a mortgage to buy a house, borrowing money to own an asset that grows in value, governments borrow to invest in things that can grow the economy. Roads, schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Borrowed money that generates more economic activity than it costs in interest can make a country richer over time. The problem comes when borrowing becomes structural, when a government borrows not to invest in growth, but simply to pay its existing bills. When interest payments start eating up a bigger and bigger share of the budget. When the debt grows faster than the economy does. The key measurement economists use is debt-to-GDP. How big is a country's debt compared to the size of its entire economy? A debt-to-GDP ratio above 100% is generally considered the danger zone. It means a country owes more than its entire economy produces in a year. Right now in 2026, a remarkable number of the world's wealthiest countries are deep inside that danger zone. How did every country end up here? The honest answer is that it happened gradually, and then suddenly. For decades, governments borrowed a little more than they collected every year. In good times, the economy grew fast enough to keep the debt manageable. In bad times, recessions, wars, crises, governments borrowed heavily to stabilize things, planning to pay it back when growth returned. But the paying back part kept getting delayed. Then came three events that changed everything. First, the 2008 global financial crisis. Governments worldwide borrowed trillions to bail out banks and prevent a complete economic collapse. Second, the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Governments borrowed trillions more to support businesses, pay wages, and fund healthcare systems under unprecedented strain. Third, the inflation crisis that followed, which forced central banks to raise interest rates sharply. Suddenly, all of that borrowed money became much more expensive to service. According to the OECD's Global Debt Report published in March 2026, governments and companies are set to borrow $29 trillion from bond markets in 2026 alone. That is $4 trillion more than in 2024 and double the amount borrowed just 10 years ago. The trajectory is not slowing down. It is accelerating. And the cost of servicing that debt, the interest payments, is rising faster than many governments can manage. The country's drowning the most right now. Let's look at the actual numbers, because they are extraordinary. Global government debt hit $111 trillion in 2025. Two countries dominate the picture. The United States carries $38.3 trillion in public debt. China holds $18.7 trillion. Together, they account for roughly half of all government debt on Earth. The U.S. debt-to-GDP ratio currently stands at 125%, meaning the U.S. owes more than its entire annual economic output. The IMF projects that number will rise to 142% by 2031. That is the largest deterioration among any advanced economy in the world. But the U.S. is not even the worst. Japan's debt-to-GDP ratio sits at 230%, more than twice the size of its entire economy. France is at 117%. Italy, Greece, Belgium, Canada, the UK, all deep inside the danger zone. And it is not just wealthy countries. As of mid-2025, more than half of the world's low-income countries are in or at high risk of debt distress, meaning they cannot reliably meet their repayment obligations. Since 2020, 11 countries have already defaulted on their debt, including Zambia, Ghana, Sri Lanka, and Ethiopia. The global debt picture is not a problem in one corner of the world. It is everywhere, at different levels of severity, with different consequences, but pointing in the same direction. What happens when a country can't pay its debt? This is the question most people are afraid to ask, because the answer is uncomfortable. When a country struggles to pay its debt, it has a small number of options, and none of them are painless. The first option is to raise taxes and cut spending, what economists call austerity. This is politically unpopular and economically painful. It slows the economy, reduces public services, and hurts ordinary people the most. The second option is to print more money. If a country controls its own currency, its central bank can create new money to pay the debt. This keeps the bills paid in the short term, but it reduces the value of every unit of currency already in circulation. It is, in effect, a hidden tax on everyone who holds that currency. This is one of the key drivers of inflation. The third option is default, simply not paying. This destroys a country's ability to borrow in the future, causes economic chaos, and often results in currency collapse and political instability. It is the last resort, but as we have seen, 11 countries have already gone there since 2020. For large economies like the U.S. or Japan, outright default is extremely unlikely. They control their own currencies and have the ability to print their way through. But that printing has a cost, and that cost is paid by ordinary people through higher prices, a weaker currency, and savings that buy less every year. What does this mean for your money? So why does any of this matter to you, someone who is just trying to manage their own finances? It matters because government debt does not stay inside government balance sheets. It flows directly into your life. When governments borrow more, they compete with businesses and individuals for available money. That competition pushes interest rates higher, which means your mortgage is more expensive, your car loan costs more, and credit card debt grows faster. When governments print money to manage debt, inflation rises. The cost of food, rent, energy, and everyday goods increases. Your savings lose purchasing power. The money you worked for buys less. And when sovereign debt becomes unstable, as we saw with Japan selling $29.6 billion in U.S. Treasuries in early 2026, or with France facing acute pressure that could affect the euro, global financial markets feel it. Stock markets fall, currencies weaken, investment becomes uncertain. None of this means a collapse is coming tomorrow, but it does mean that the old assumption that governments will always manage their debt comfortably is increasingly hard to justify with the data. What smart people are doing right now is diversifying, not keeping all their financial security tied to one currency, one government's decisions, or one type of asset. Gold has risen 53% since 2024. Bitcoin's value proposition as a fixed supply asset that no government can print more of becomes more compelling every time another country's debt story makes headlines. Understanding the debt problem does not mean panicking. It means paying attention and making smarter decisions with your own money as a result. $111 trillion in government debt, growing every year, affecting every mortgage, every price tag, every savings account on earth. Now you understand what most people don't. hit subscribe, and turn on the bell. Every week, Coin Explained breaks down one more piece of the financial world, simply, clearly, and honestly. Next week, we are talking about gold, why it has risen 53% in just over a year, and why the world's central banks are quietly buying more of it than at any point in decades. See you there.